He's a multifaceted creative. He's worked with the likes of Rihanna, Jay-Z, Nike, LVMH, The Weeknd, and more. While she's technically a graphic designer, she's kind of blown my mind in terms of what's capable in terms of someone who's known for one thing and is able to kind of take on new tasks and new opportunities. What do you think people know you as online, and do you think that that's reflective of who you are as a person?
Eugene gave you guys a little bit of a background of sort of where I sort of started my
And you
creative
hated all of
journey.
it.
Hated all of it. Obviously, it was an online persona. I come from a small place in Australia, and that was their touch point was a persona that was used as a way for me to express things that I come from a culture which is very subdued and there's tall poppy syndrome, and Australia is not very emotionally open. So I used sort of this alter ego to sort of mask or protect myself to be able to sort of express those things. But in doing that, that's people associate me with something that's not like really who I am.
Mm.
So, everyone sort of goes to like, oh, you're the guy from the blog, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
like the horrible feeling. But
Yeah.
because I know that me personally, there's so much more there. But yeah,
So
it's usually
actually,
that's
to
the
that
touch
point, is it kind of an ego thing where like you don't want to be known as simplistically as the blog guy?
Yeah, I think it's very like it puts you in like a bit of a pigeonhole.
Was there a moment in time when it did feel good though? Like what about the first time
Yeah.
someone was like, "You're the blog guy"?
Well, a little bit. I mean, it felt nice at the start because it was a way to express myself.
Yeah.
I came from a smaller town in Australia, and it was a way to sort of get those feelings out and to sort of get those ideas out and start that sort of creative process personally. So.
But you don't want that following you around anymore.
I guess it's just like it's kind of not had its time. It still exists, but sometimes it feels like I've been doing more, trying to be doing more. So it's when it sort of goes back to that first touch point. It's kind of like
Yeah, I've evolved so much past this now.
yeah, try to. I suppose. So yeah, I guess that would be the.
Now, you, Charis, obviously, when we first started working together, you were a graphic designer, and now you're still a graphic designer. Now you're a student. Now you're a podcaster. You're a writer. All these things.
It's funny because I didn't get to hear any of your introduction of me.
Yeah.
Because we were talking in the back. Sorry about that. But I just totally missed it, so I have no idea how you described me. But I think I like to describe myself in terms of action words, which is useful for everyone, I think. So instead of saying that I'm a student or a writer, a podcaster, a designer, I do design and I write and I podcast, and those are actions that I can say factually that I do, and that makes up my life. But if the second you put it into a kind of person, it becomes one more level up. Now I have to fulfill whatever your expectation of what that kind of person is or what that person has on their CV.
Yeah. And between you two, like obviously this is something I kind of touched upon early on, was that between James and Charis, like there's probably a generation in between there. Maybe you can start off by explaining how you were put onto creative culture growing up in a small town in Australia, and obviously seeing how it is now. It's obviously very different.
Yeah. Something that we sort of talked about a little bit earlier is that I didn't start out being creative at all. Like my working class family, my dad worked in a factory, my mom was a teacher. And I actually started quite late. I didn't realize what it is I really wanted to do. And after I finished school, I thought I was meant to go to college and get the degree and everything. So I was doing computer science, and that was just what I was meant to do. But that wasn't really kind of making sense. And my first I guess my first experience with having sort of some creative response or emotional response to creativity was a trip I did to Europe. It was my first time traveling alone, and I was in Florence, and I was just kind of surrounded by art, and it was sort of this sort of waking up moment where I was just sort of realized that there was more out there, I suppose, and there was my first kind of like emotional response to creativity.
But I guess before that, something that you mentioned that was really interesting is that your creative vector was through a different medium. Like music to you was through looking at skate videos, for example.
Right. So I think it's something that Lindsay said earlier too, is that you grow up surrounding these sort of subcultures like skateboarding or hardcore music, and a lot of your touch points come from those subcultures which kind of just is what the world sort of soaked up at a certain point, and then you could use those, influences of music, influences of art from a young age that you didn't really think about, like you listen to like you're watching a skate video to watch a skate video, you didn't really think about.
When did it click for you? Like when did it turn from, oh, I'm just watching this video because everyone watches these videos, to, hey, I can actually direct videos like this, or I can be in videos like
I'm
this?
still not sure I'm quite there yet, but it's interesting. I guess it was an earlier seed that was planted, and I didn't really understand it. But then going back now, I can understand how the music and the direct and all that sort of creativity influence sort of later on. So it's kind of a reflection thing. So there wasn't a point early
So
on.
you're
where I was
going
like,
back and thinking about tracing this narrative through.
yeah, sort of where it came from, and early things like the skate videos and stuff like that sort of planted those
Yeah, and
creative thoughts.
James and I were talking earlier about this, and it's just interesting because we sort of had opposite experiences growing up, because I was always interested in art and design and saw that as the only option viable for me, whereas you had to go to Europe and go to Florence in order to find that. And I do feel really fortunate that somehow I just started in it and then continued onward.
Was there ever a point though where you were just like, no, this is
No,
not?
I was pretty much rubbish at everything else. So that was kind of the, like, maths and sciences and music were not viable possibilities. So I guess it was like what I was best at. So to
Right.
pursue that.
And like, this is a question for you, Charis. What did you think, like in terms of a career, when he was starting off, what do you think was the process to be a creative pre-internet?
Yeah, I mean,
Like this is you sort of like obviously being too young to actually be a professional, but just
I
figuring
mean,
out.
when I started out in university, I definitely thought that the path was to graduate and then go into an agency and be an intern and then junior designer and then designer, senior designer, art director, creative director, and then maybe one day open my own agency. And that was, I don't think I'm that much younger, but that's how I saw the path. What about you when you finished school?
It was very traditional. It was very you go through the tiers to get to the final.
Do you think people
resting
still
place.
think about it that way?
I don't think so, because I think the creative landscape has kind of changed. Like there's so much access to the creative industries now that you're able to fast track, which I think is great in some aspects.
What do you think allows the fast tracking?
I think it's access to information based on that. I think you can have creative influence from a much younger age. You can learn things, on YouTube. Like, you can learn how to render, learn how to shoot. There's all these tutorials. You can basically get the traditional training without having to go through the practice.
But are there still realms where you think something formal is necessary? Kind of question for
I
both
think
of you.
maybe like it's going to sound like maybe not so much, but like I think with like fashion in more of a craft approach, like with the ateliers.
I don't know.
No, I think that if you go to like maybe a proper house, like you think all the ateliers are still, ladies that have been there for 50 years, and you really still have to go through that process to be making those patterns. You can start a fashion brand.
The reason I said that was because like John Jay earlier this morning started out and with this slide of Virgil at the top of LVMH, and that's like almost immediately when you said fashion, I was like, that is representative of a non-formal path.
Correct.
To the top.
Correct. Right. But there's varying positions.
I actually think that with regards to creative culture, like you kind of pick and choose your own path, and there's no sort of regimented or institutional approach that's necessary. I think that we're pretty much representative of it at Macon. Like, I don't come from a journalism background. You kind of do, but like that was never your intention. You just kind of have that desire to figure it out, right?
But what about people who don't have access to the tools to carve their own path?
I actually think that it's not the case as much anymore. But this is actually my question. Like, I think that if you want to go start a blog, right, like everything's been sort of flattened across the board, like everyone can do everything. If you guys are kind of generally in agreement that the tools are accessible to everybody, then what determines someone's success?
Nepotism? Or creative talent, innate. I think if you can give the same set of tools to 100 people, they're all going to use them differently. So it's like, I think that while photography is a really great example, that like it's really very easily accessible, but to really stand out, it takes a certain talent and a really specific eye and a purpose and a narrative and all this. So
I think I disagree though, because so I agree with the premise that the tools are accessible to everyone. And I do think that it does take talent and hard work. But at the same time, we haven't really mentioned the fact that the opportunities are not equally available to everyone.
Sure.
And that's kind of what I meant by there are definitely people who might see, okay, people are saying carve your own path, but actually I don't have the means, or the means that I have are so different.
Yeah, interesting.
I
Because I think
agree.
that,
I agree.
but the one thing you led with was Virgil, right? I think Virgil has already been representative of a non-traditional route, right?
Yes, but I just think he is exceptional.
Yeah.
I don't know, I just worry about, I worry about a lot of things, but one of the things I worry about is that when we say, okay, Virgil can do it, it kind of takes us off the hook. Like, oh, it's possible. Someone can still lift themselves up from the bootstraps and do this crazy dance to the top, so everyone young out there can do the same thing. And
That's not
that
the
feels,
case.
that feels
No,
like
no,
we're
it's
making
not.
an excuse for ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Because as you said, the opportunities and the access and just the presence is not afforded to everybody, you know.
So a question for you, James, is that if you were to start today, do you think that you would be able to attain a certain level of success that you have now?
Or is not half as successful as when you were on it.
No, I'm not really sure. I think that gave me, it was a way for me to escape where I was living. It was a way for me to get out. And it was a way for me to sort of access this world, this creative industry that at the time, if that hadn't existed, I wouldn't have moved to America. I wouldn't have worked in New York, all this stuff. So I feel as though, I can't really say. I think that I can say that if it was earlier and that avenue wasn't accessible, I don't think I would have.
Yeah.
I don't think I would be here. It
Sure.
was really a way for me to, reach out and get past sort of the walls of where I was living. But at the moment, I think it's just really interesting. I kind of was on the cusp where I was a third assistant for like fashion photography. I was a third assistant, second assistant, first assistant, did production, and I kind of really worked my way up. And then like sort of halfway through, I kind of like was like, oh, there's a hop, skip, and a jump that I can take.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of on the cusp of it.
How have you navigated the different changes in technology and the way people market themselves? And it's all very rapid. So what
is.
worked for you 10 years ago didn't work 8 years and then 6 years and 4 years.
Yeah.
So did you find yourself like thinking about how do I adjust to this?
I guess I kind of always lean back on that traditional path of knowing that I the design degree, I cut my teeth properly, and I lean on that process, and I work 9 to 5, 6 days a week, and I kind of try to keep that regimen, and like that work ethic, I think, is something that I can hold on to, I suppose,
Right,
if that
so
answers your question.
It's like kind of no matter what the external changes are,
Yeah.
if I have this internal standard, if I have this
Right.
set of disciplines, then that will take
Yeah.
me.
And always like learning, like I always, with every job I take, I always try to add in something that I don't know, that I've got to like learn, whether it's like 3D rendering or some form of production or anything on that side. So I think it's a matter of evolving with it, because I think if you rely on the past and where you've come from, say it's an academic background, but the industry is evolving into a non-academic field, then you're, putting yourself behind the 8 ball for not really any goal or reason other than maybe pride, and you'll ultimately sort of, sacrifice or suffer by your own,
The internal
detriment.
discipline thing definitely sticks out to me. And just thinking about what can I hold myself personally accountable for, regardless of what's going on around me.
Right.
Things might change, and I can make that decision of whether I will dive into this new trend or whether I'm going to intentionally buck it.
Well, it's interesting because it's not a traditional workplace anymore, too. So, like, I've freelanced most of my life, and same for you, I'm sure, as a lot of it's freelance work, and so it's like, how do you manage the personal expectations with client expectations, with staying on top of, all of your admin?
How do you do it?
while
Tell us.
No, I do it all
Share.
myself. It's just me. I don't have an
Yeah.
assistant. I don't have QuickBooks or anything like that. It's all
Well,
just,
for both of you guys as quote unquote creatives, generally speaking, there's a balance between what you believe the work should look like versus that of a client. And how do you guys manage that?
I mean, I feel like James' answer is going to be different, but for me, in my freelance work, I really do take the client's problem at heart. I try to not go in having this clear vision of what I think the answer, the solution should be, and just trying to understand what they perceive the problem to be. How can I inform that problem, and does that fit the problem that is presented? Rather than, I really want it to have this final shiny package, and I'm going to make it that. So, I mean, maybe that makes me feel good in a moment, or maybe it looks good on one Instagram post, but ultimately, I don't think it serves a bigger purpose.
For me, it's a balance. It depends on how you're approaching the work. I think it's important from a certain aspect to have a voice and an identity and a artistic point of view. But you, as a freelancer, you have to pay the rent and you have to feed yourself, and there has to be some form of sustainability. So with client work, it's a lot of the time it's balancing how much of yourself you want to interject.
Do you think younger people who are getting into this understand that?
I'm not sure. I think it's probably going to be a hard lesson for a lot of kids at a certain point where they're like, oh, this is the job where I'm going to do this cool thing that I want to do, and they get there and the client's like, this is absolutely not what we wanted. The fuck is going on?
Right.
Yeah.
But I think it's more interesting and more exciting to serve a client and do something that's not just your style, because it's more of a challenge, and it's part of the process. It's part of what the design process is to answer these questions or to answer a why, and it's more of a challenge to work on something that's
it's more thinking.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's more thinking through the actuality of something.
Yeah, exactly. And that's it's a more intrinsic creative process, and there's more of a narrative, and it's more of a conversation. And I think it's because you have to understand their point of view, and then you're able to apply your skills and abilities to that.
In the last 5 years or so, how have you guys seen sort of the evolution of building a career in the space?
I think it changes a lot obviously it's changed a lot with social media. I think a lot of it is outward projection or how would you say, self-applied, aim, for lack of a better word. I think it's a lot more about, at the moment it feels like it's a lot more about saying that you're doing something rather than actually getting it done or showing that you've done it.
I think we struggle against it, you and I, with Macon, because we've felt so much that by doing a good thing, the good thing will be noticed. But the reality that we've seen in the past few years is that many people do good things and they're never noticed because we're not yelling loud enough or cutting through the noise or whatever metaphor you want. So it feels like I don't want to do it. I don't want to go out and have to shout, hey, we're doing this good thing. But at the same time, if I don't, then who will know? Right.
It's an unnecessary, it's a necessary, I guess, I think of it as an unnecessary evil, but it's a part of the process now that to be seen as creative, you have to be present on the social platforms. You have to show what you do. I shy away from that a lot, and a lot of my stuff is out there because I believe that I just don't want to do that. That's not what I choose to do. But it is tough. It is really tough.
If you were to not share your work, like let's say you did some hype stuff, and you didn't share it, and in 5 years you became irrelevant because no one recognized your work, would you be okay with that?
Yeah, because I guess it was like being true to myself. Like if I would rather that than to be like blasting it and feeling like I'm not being like myself and like saying, oh, check me out, I'm the shit, and then get to a place where I'm like, oh, I've had to be that guy, which I'm not, to get to a place which I wanted to get to.
But what if it validated itself? What if you posting this stuff ended up getting you more jobs?
For sure, and I think that's a really important part of it. I think it is necessary. That's why I'm kind of like, I struggle with it a little bit. I'm not too sure if you're the same, but it is part of the process to be present, to be top of mind. And
I think the thing I try to think about is whose recognition or favor am I looking for?
Right.
Am I interested in the recognition of being on social media and a lot of people liking it and commenting on those photos? What does that serve me? Yeah. If that is the recognition I want. If there's something else, if there's someone else whose recognition I'd rather have, can I go another route?
Right.
Because your question was like, oh, what if people don't recognize anymore? My question back to you is, well, which people? I think
Yeah.
that's the question. Which
Yeah,
people am I
would you
trying?
rather, 100,000 strangers or,
Right.
or 10 of your closest peers, or maybe, but for me, like, it's like people in this conference, like
Right.
people I'm sitting next to and talking to, I'm just like, these are, having that peer sort of respect is just as important. So it is a really good point. It's like,
Yeah.
like, who are you trying to impress?
Yeah,
Or
and
what validation are you looking for, really?
I know that this is not useful for making money and being sustainable, but I feel like, well, I don't need this conference to be in national papers or blow up on some blog. I just want one person in this audience to recognize this as valuable. I understand that that doesn't translate into being sustainable enough to have another conference then, so I don't really know how to connect those two dots.
So having said that, obviously there's a very strong relationship with the craft and the art. Why do you think, generally speaking, creatives have been so shy about the money conversation?
It's tough. It's like if you have to do it for yourself, like if you have to like say to somebody, "I'm worth this much." At least for me personally, it's really hard. It's you have to be really confident. You have to be really forward and
Yeah.
really understand that your worth and value. And it's not a great conversation to be like, "I want X amount and I'm worth it." It's great if you can do it, and I think it's really important to understand your value and worth. But I think it's this sort of conflict between art and commerce.
I mean, well, David Cho talked about it right before us, which is, I think for creatives, we have this problem in our brains where we think, why would anyone pay me to do this thing? And it also seems sort of nuts to be like, well, I already love to design or make art or make music, and now someone wants to pay me to do the thing that I love. In our heads, that doesn't make sense. And that's why it keeps us from demanding what we are worth in actual fiscal dollars.
Yeah, it's not like a direct. It's not like like you can't. It's not a direct
No.
connection. There's like a break in it, and it's
Yeah, I mean, to that
tough on a
point,
jump.
I generally subscribe to you guys' point of view. Charisse knows very well, like, that's generally how I've looked at things. But then there's one thing that kind of blew my mind, and it wasn't necessarily that it was massively revelational. It's just like, oh, it makes sense, is that I was in John Jay's office in Tokyo, and he was just saying, like, money isn't the enemy because it enables you to do better work,
Absolutely,
right? And I
yeah.
think that if there's one thing that creatives need to understand, it's like, your work can be good regardless when it's for yourself, but imagine what you unlock by having a little bit of that secret sauce.
Yeah, absolutely.
It feels a little bit dirty in a way, and I know that's like my personal perspective, but it just feels, I just haven't gotten over it yet.
I guess you could use it as a tool. Like if you look
Yeah,
at,
yeah,
it's a tool you could use to push forward and develop and
No,
grow.
definitely.
And it'll, allow you to get to a different place, to talk to a different person, or to do a kind of, maybe a process or a project that you weren't able to do because you didn't have the funds or access. So,
Do you have a specific example of that? Was there a project that you had where, money came in and then suddenly the options widened?
Yeah, I when I first came to America, I was working at a boutique agency called WP&A, and we did all the touring and all the live direction and stuff like that. And the first project we worked on was the Jay-Z Barclay opening. That was the 8 shows in a row. And it wasn't obviously money directly to me, but it was a scale I've never worked at before. At one point, we were just, the first night I'd just flown in from Australia, and I was, directing the lighting. I'm like, this is insane that I'm able to sort of flex this creative, or at least, process on a stage this big for this many people. But it's money. That's just,
Yeah.
It's just like the stage was that big because he paid $1 million, $2 million for it. And it was insanity, but that's, it really changes things.
It increases the quality of other people's experience.
I think so. I think you're just able to get so much more out of it. But that's not to say that you can't get a really good visceral emotional reaction out of, pennies and dollars. A great example is our music videos. It's like you have, $10,000, or you have like $500,000. It's like you can get the right location, you can get a couple of extras, you can get the right DP, and it just allows you to, really tell the story you want to tell. But I think that I think that there's really value in being able to do it without that. I don't think that you should rely on it, but it definitely changes the game a lot, for sure.
Is there anything that gives you guys anxiety? What is it? What's the number one thing that gives you a lot of anxiety?
You can go.
Oh,
first
what?
if you like.
No, because the first thing that popped into my head was everything. Oh, everything gives me anxiety.
And the reason why I want to ask that question is that, like, for us, it's like, for you guys, especially as creatives, there's like, a set of problems that generally you guys are focused on. So like, is there a crossover there between the set of problems you guys are often solving for clients and your own anxieties? Or is it separate? Is the client work easy?
Mine's a little bit more existential in a weird way. It's kind of like more, am I doing the right kind of work I want to be doing? When's the next paycheck gonna come in? Like, it's just all these things. It's just general life stuff.
It's funny because yours is like really big picture, like, am I doing the right work? But also like, oh, when can I pay
right,
for
right. And it's all part and parcel. So when we say, I guess, not to speak for you, but when the anxiety is universal, it's because it's from top to bottom. It's working with clients. It's working with peers. It's getting the money in. It's being able to pay. It's all of it. Is the work good enough? Is it what I want to be doing?
Well, if I can pick one specific thing about Macon, so both of us we talk about this, is how do I tell the story right? And am I doing the subject or the nature of this story justice? Is my perspective fair? I do have a lot of anxiety of, does the reader get what I am trying to say, and what are they going to leave this piece or this audio story with? And I think that is a good anxiety to have. I think it makes the work better.
Also the desire as well.
Yeah.
So, it's an anxiety that stems from wanting to be able to do
I
the
mean,
job
if you
well.
downgrade anxiety, it can just be a desire until it keeps you up at
Passion.
night.
Yeah,
and then it's-
exactly.
Do you guys look at the current path that we're taking as like a culture in terms of what we're able to create with? Do you guys see a linear path, or do you guys see a fork in the road at some point?
Create with in what sense?
So for example, if this is up to you obviously to determine, but if you feel that currently we're at a decent place creatively, but it's going to get worse because everything's so algorithmically and driven by numbers, or do you think we're going to push against that?
I mean, earlier I wanted to say that the positive note of having difficulty shouting about the good thing is that there are so many more good things out there. And back in time, there were fewer people making really great things, and so it was easier for those things to be amplified. So nowadays, there's something for everyone, and also more local things, right? So I think that's great. And we might complain about, okay, how do we get across our individual message, but at the same time, it's great that there are so many people getting to talk about their things. I mean, I guess I'm generally optimistic.
And I'm not.
Not
So
so optimistic.
yeah.
Perfect.
Good
Why are
balance.
you not optimistic?
No, I think that it's not anything to do with the creative industries. It's just me personally, just who I am. But I think that I'm not too sure. I don't think that there's anything really bad. I think the creative industry is really open at the moment. It's kind of like a Wild West, and I don't think that there really is. It's just what you want to do. It's how you want to approach it.
Do you feel like there's not enough standards?
It depends. I think if you hold yourself to your own standards, it's all you should kind of worry about. I think you'll be lost if you try to answer all the other.
Like, do you generally agree with whatever's popular currently? Do you agree with?
No.
And why do you think that is?
No.
Is that because you're older or more mature or you've seen more?
Wait, can you describe what's popular currently?
Let's just say hypothetically, this is like a movement that's going on that's massive, or like a style of music, a style of
like
dress.
like trend or
Yeah.
popular culture.
Well, I know, but
Like
like, don't we want to be popular too? So I feel like your question is, do we just hate on what's popular then?
Well, no, I think that there's a
No.
time and place where you can see a movement develop, and
Yeah,
you're like,
for
I
sure.
genuinely believe in it.
I
right?
think that if the message and the culture has like a genuine purpose and genuine intent, and it comes from a place of like, I think the shifts in activism around like social injustice and stuff like that, that's like amazing. And it's like, you could call it a trend because it's really like visible right now, and I think that that's great, and it has a purpose, it has a reason to be here, and I think it has like an ultimate goal. But if you look at certain things like this rapper who has been to jail for like hitting women is the most famous person in the world, you're like, I can't get behind this. There's nothing here for me. So it's give and take. I think it's
Right, but you can't. I guess I'm resistant to lumping everything popular together.
right. You can't.
Right.
Yeah, popular culture is hard. I think because I'm maybe a little older, I lean on older things. So I can be saltier at a younger audience. But it's just you do have to piecemeal it a little bit, I suppose. So yeah, there are things that you could, maybe not find at peace with, but it's just about choosing, I suppose.
Yeah.
Knowing which battles to sort of fight or which ones just to step aside and be like, I'm good.
I mean, I think it takes a lot of legwork, but to look at what's popular and decipher why that thing is popular, and if you're on board with it, which is what you're saying is the
Sure.
key thing, right?
Yeah, if there's a reason
Yeah.
that it's popular,
And
or if it's popular for popular culture's sake.
Right. And not just be like, this music video has 10 million views and it's
Yeah.
rubbish because
Yeah.
of that.
But I think there's also something to be said for being, having active criticism with popular culture and having conversation
Yeah.
with it as you ingest these things. There's so much information coming in on social media and videos and stuff. It's up to you to be like saying like, do I really like
Yeah.
this?
Yeah. No, I like
video
that
or
phrase.
this-
Is your general sentiment that there's not enough critical thought and analysis?
For sure.
And why do you think that the case? Like, would you, if you look back at yourself 10 years ago, do you think you had that same critical thought and analysis?
I think it's just like there's so much like to ingest these days. There's so much just thrown at you, like social media, like popular culture. Like nonstop.
But I think
And
there's two fundamentals there. Is it like the fact that it's just tiring to need to filter it, or do we not have the tools to actually filter it?
Well, it's actually something we've said earlier. I think that it's like I think the ability to receive critique has been kind of lost.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
people struggle with having someone say, I don't really like your work, but also too, the ability to be able to articulate why you don't like somebody's work is just as important. So it's sort of a two-way battle. It's sort of like, I think the art of critique is sort of being lost because people think you're just hating and you're just being negative. It's like, no, I actually have a point
Yeah.
of view, but it's also up to you to be able to articulate that in a clear manner so that they understand. So I think that's
I think in a
kind of been lost a little
way,
bit too.
pessimistic part of me is towards the technology and the tools that we've adopted. I think they push us towards simplification. They dilute our messages so that even though in the past we might have been capable of communicating ourselves properly and in long form, we've been weaned off of that. We've been trained to
140 characters.
yeah,
That's
exactly,
it. So
to
you got-
simplify our messages. And so without us noticing, that has eroded our ability to be critically analytical about things.
My question regarding that is like, do you feel like you guys being up on stage here and just like the general sort of crowd today, is there a sense of elitism in regards to like we have more knowledge, more whatever in terms of critiquing stuff, like, or should we be like, hey, let's like understand what's before us in the challenge and like let's filter it down?
Jump in.
No, go
I
for
would
it,
say that there probably is grounds to have that, but having watched the speakers and people like John Jay and Dave Cho and the ladies before, it's like everyone seems to be. There doesn't seem that. It seems very open and very like accepting of. I don't think that there's the elitism there. I think that if anywhere, John Jay is probably the best example. It's like if there should be anywhere where elitism could exist in this conference, he's the guy. He's done it all. I looked up to him in college, but he's talked to everyone. I've heard nothing but great stories. He comes up here and he's eloquent and he's welcoming, and it's really refreshing and it's nice. I think it's a sort of a theme that I've sort of met through everyone at this conference so far.
I mean, I think our structure of this conference is already non-traditional in terms of having 3 people on stage, a moderator, 2 people talking to each other, and that's already better than having a series of people talk to a crowd, one to everyone.
Yeah.
But in
But
an
even
ideal,
David's talk was, it was everyone was
yeah, but
involved.
it's participatory.
really
I was just
personal
about to
and
say, in an
intimate, yeah.
ideal situation, I feel like if obviously tons of organization, but if we could just work it out so that people were in different small groups and talking to each other, and then maybe there were different experts, like I feel like that would be also just as exciting / more exciting than having us on stage, right? And that would, I mean, I don't think of this
Yeah.
as elitist, but that would
Well, the
be
conversation
kind
is
of
the
an
part.
answer to
Yeah.
it.
Conversation is part of the creative process too. So being able to talk to somebody and have feedback is like, it's very different from us being up here talking and there being no real response and having to have a moderator, and that's the break and that's kind of the halfway ground. But then the real interest and the real feedback comes when you're actually having a creative conversation with somebody, whether it's one-on-one or it's a group, and there is that two-way communication is really important.
So for you guys, what do you deem to be success on a personal level and or on a larger cultural level? Maybe starting with you, because you have like a baked-in audience that you potentially can steer in a certain way. Like, how do you look at that?
For me, success, I feel like I could at some point have said in the last 5 years that I kind of hit the top, and I was working with great artists, and I was getting paid a certain amount, and I was living in LA, and it was all great, but I wasn't really happy. So for me,
Why weren't you happy?
sorry,
Why weren't you happy?
it was not the way I wanted to work in terms of process. I was exhausted. I wasn't having the interactions and the feedback to the craft and the creativity which was ultimately suffering because I wasn't giving back to it. And so when that happened, I left the agency I was at when I first came here, and just made a point to say, like, I have to be happy to be, and that's like a really big, like, for me to do my work properly, I have to be, at a good place. And
So
then
you would equate happiness with success?
for sure, I mean, you have to live, and you have to, afford, certain, like, be able to pay rent and eat and everything. That is also part of success, but for me, it's not monetary so much. It's more about
Your own personal feeling.
yeah, exactly, like how you feel when you're doing the work.
What about you, Charis?
Funny because you know that's like your favorite question
Yeah.
to ask, the success question. I don't know. I think it's to refer to John Jay this morning. I think it is to have an open mind. I do think that I have a fear of my thoughts narrowing, that I rely on the things that I think I've learned and am unwilling to reconsider those things, to reopen questions that I've answered previously. So if I can, and I don't know how I have perspective on myself being this way or not in 2, 5, 10, 20 years, but if I can continue to maintain that ability of breaking down what I think I know to re-ask myself, then I would be happy.
It's like
Yeah.
examination in the process.
Yeah.
It's not getting to a point being like, I know it all.
No,
This is it.
I think it's just the maintenance of a state of mind.
Yeah.
I mean, I can say that it sounds very lofty. I too would like to keep paying rent and bills, but ultimately, I think that is how I would measure success for myself.
For sure.
Yeah. I'm supposed to start the Q&A, but I just have one question I wanted to ask you guys.
Okay.
We've talked about how everything's been super democratic as of late and access to tools. For you guys personally, how do you stand out amongst commodification? As more and more graphic designers, like whether I can go on Fiverr, I can go on whatever, and hire a graphic designer or photographer. How do you guys push back against that and have your own independent position within the creative landscape?
It's a clear point of view. When I work with clients or musicians or artists, whoever it may be, the way I approach things is really personal. It's very, very much about communication. It's very much about a collaboration, and experience really helps. Having that, being able to articulate the creative process and certain practices, rather than just being like, oh, here's a photographer, they're going to shoot it, it's going to be great. It's like, we've actually chosen this photographer for these reasons, this is why we're going to shoot this is how we're going to do it. And I think that, and not to say it in a bad way, but what would make you stand out more these days is more thought and more consideration and more, more purpose, I suppose, rather than being like, got this kid, got a camera, it's going to be sick. And you're just like, that's cool, but there's not much to go off. And everyone can really do that. You could say that. So for me, it's, more of a personal thought and process.
Well, I'm going to steal something from someone else in answer to this question. So I did a profile of Avery Trufelman, a producer at 99% Invisible, earlier this year. And she said to be successful, you really only need 2 out of 3 things. You need to pick out of being on time, being great to work with, and delivering good work. And I think I do good work. I'm definitely not on time, so I must also be great to work with. And that's, I guess, how
All
it's
you need.
gotten me this far.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go through some Q&A questions. The first one for you, James. You have such a wide and deep artistic vocabulary. M dash. I want to reference that because someone actually used an M dash there.
Interesting.
Was
From
it you?
stage design, fashion to photography and much more. is there a certain point of view or style that unites your work across all mediums?
I'm not sure. I guess there is. There must be, because when people come to me, they say, "Oh, we love your work," and I'm just like, "Cool."
Which part of it,
I'm
right?
like, "Which part?" Like,
Yeah.
I don't really get it, but it's great, and I think that it's more maybe tone of voice. It's maybe more of that purpose.
Do you think someone can
behind it.
look at whatever you do and say, James did that?
I want to say yes.
Yeah.
Like as the creative and the artist, I want to say
Yeah.
yes, but I think that there's part of me where it's like a lot of the work I've done is to serve the client's purpose, and so a lot of it will be, answering a need from them, which might not represent myself. I think that's part of the process, and the idea of as a creative is get to a point where everything has your little touch on it, but something I'm still working towards, or at least I think so.
And for you, Charis, what do you see as the role of creative culture to the world's progress and innovation, and how do you see your role as a contributor to creative culture?
I think I play a small role. I don't know. I think I'm flattered to have any role at all in it. But to answer the first half of that question, you can't be innovative without being creative. I feel like those two words are intrinsically linked. In order to innovate, you have to be creative, and whether that innovation is in tech or medicine or photography or whatever it is, to make something new, it means you had to come up with something
abstract
different,
thought.
right?
Yeah.
Something different from what exists,
Mhm.
and that is creativity
Mhm.
at its core, or putting together things in a different
Mhm.
way, which is what this whole conference is
Mhm.
about. Having the same materials as someone and thinking, actually, you can combine, A to Z instead of A to B.
And last question for you. You are notoriously private online. What compelled you to speak today?
You asked so nicely.
Yeah.
That was really it. I don't know. I looked at the lineup and there was some,
Trying to
people.
steal someone's brand equity, hey? I'm like, I'm gonna.
Yeah,
put
no,
myself next to these people.
there was some people on the bill today which I grew up in design college looking up to, and I was just like, this is not really going to get a chance to sort of be around this. So yeah, that was it. But I am slowly dying inside.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that wraps up our talk with Charis and James.
Thank
Give them
you,
a round of
James.
applause. Yeah.